right, I think we can go ahead and get going. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate your time today, and I think this is a topic that's generated quite a bit of interest over time. It's grown in the telling. The specific initiative that we'd originally envisaged this session to cover has shrunk significantly. But I think out of some comments at the SIT working group and at the NFT working group, I think we took on board at the program level that there is some confusion around why we're asking you as participants to run certain tests and to not run, and how we're tracing it back and what we're doing. So if you're here just for the SIT functional and migration rationalization discussion, that will probably take place in the next 10 minutes and you can safely drop off. But I've widened the scope of today's presentation to include an overview, at least, of some of the other initiatives that the program has undertaken around scope for testing and just kind of communication and trying to bring them all together into one place. Again, today is going to be very high level, but hopefully we've taken some actions that will reassure you all, and we can show you what we're doing about trying to clear up some of that confusion and be a bit more transparent. So I will also publish this slideshow to the collaboration base after the meeting. So without further ado, bit of an agenda here. Stages of scope refinement, again, kind of a really high level overview initially. Then we'll go directly into what the purpose of this meeting was, which was originally the SIT functional and migration rationalization. I'll talk through some of the work that was done on the SIT migration optimization, RTTM gap analysis that started in the summer, and then some settlement rationalization, just an overview of that, which Stuart has taken on recently. And then at the end, I'll talk about the traceability document that is as yet unnamed, but should show transparency around the tests that have been descoped and brought into scope. By the way, this is a working group. I think the working group was the audience for this, so I'm completely fine if anyone has any questions at any point. Raise your hands. I'm not going to stand on ceremony. All right, stages of scope refinement. So during cycle 1 and cycle 2, we recognized that testing velocity was slower than we'd anticipated. We had various models in place that showed to reach the original timelines what we would need to achieve. That we were quickly disabused of those notions, and to mitigate that situation, we raised CR55, revising our models and recommending extending program milestones. But if we're going to extend program milestones, we need to make sure that we're asking you to run the right things. Wasted effort is the antithesis of what we're trying to achieve. So we looked at a number of separate initiatives, and they each arose organically over time. But I think, again, it's now incumbent on us, given that they have been independent, that we bring them all into one place and to look at them as one initiative. Well, not as one initiative, but at least as one program. So what are they? There's this initiative. Oops, can we all go on mute if someone's not on mute? This initiative, which was the functional SIT migration rationalization, where we looked at tests that shared requirements with at least one other scenario. I think if I have PPC on the line, could we make sure that everyone's muted, please? We also have the migration optimization. This was out of the RTTM work that we took on with the code bodies that's immediately below. Where were there areas where these tests would be better run? The RTTM gap analysis itself we found that there were gaps in the RTTM as originally agreed. So we needed to add the role-based changes. And then that both added and descoped tests. And then the settlement optimization that Stuart's been spearheading, which is analysis of the exit criteria and qualification requirements. This didn't actually descope any tests, but what it meant was that not every participant would need to run every test. All right, so that's very, very high level overview. Ellie, I saw your hand go up. Was that just a misclick?
Yes, it was. Thanks, Roger.
Excellent. Good, good, good. All right. So SIT functional and migration rationalization. Again, this was the original scope of this meeting, and it turned out to essentially be a bit of a storm in a teacup. We'd originally looked at all tests in scope and did an analysis of their requirements. So a number of requirements were mapped to each test case, or are mapped to each test case. And we found that across the entire scope of functional migration, there were a set of 60 tests that had at least one other test that matched the exact same requirements. So we did that analysis, brought that list to the test architecture team. Kevin's group, now being led by Salman Bukhari. So we looked at the RTTM itself. We mapped test cases to requirements to ensure traceability and coverage. We did a gap identification around those to make sure that the RTTM itself was as full coverage as needed to be. We reviewed this master test case list. We identified redundant test cases, duplicates and overlaps, non-executables, and then we optimized them. We had high priority executable test cases and finished the streamlined master test case list. After all of those activities, after all of that work with the 60 original test cases, we narrowed it down to 3 test cases that we thought were duplicate. And I'll publish these to the collaboration base. But the original list of 60 primarily was where we thought maybe meters, the metering type could be was redundant. That's the case for the first test on this list, and some slight requirement mapping differences on the second. There was a number that we'd originally looked at that were determined to be actually subtle differences in the requirements. We were testing different areas of the requirement in the test. So while at a surface level, they each had the same requirements, they ended up testing different aspects. So we think that all of that work boiled down to these 3 test cases that we think are covered elsewhere. Again, I will publish this, and we will go in and look at what the next steps are. So this list is currently under review with the code bodies. They got it earlier or last night, I think, as a finalist. We were even determining there was one test case that was still in scope when I first started building this PowerPoint that we later determined needed to stay on the list, needed to stay in scope, that we thought we would descope it. So we'll take this. We've taken this to the code bodies. It's under review with code bodies. This walkthrough is, is for you all to discuss and to talk to us about, and then we will bring those 3 test cases to SIT Working Group and SITAG, hopefully for a fairly quick recommendation and approval. I'm going to pause there for any questions. Yes, Ellie.
When does the list expect to conclude with code bodies? Because I noticed on a slide for session last week that it was with them week commencing the 6th. Yeah, so that would have been last week.
That's what we thought. Yeah, and we gave an initial list, but at this point, it's we've refined it down and down. So I think we'll talk with them. We thought that it wouldn't take very long the last time we discussed it. So I believe it should be relatively early in the new year. that we are able to come to an agreement. If there is anyone from code bodies on the call, I'm happy to have your voice be heard. If not, we have it as a standing agenda item. We have a standing Wednesday meeting, so I expect early in the new year. We'll have that well before SIT working group, hopefully, and SITAC.
That will form their decision over that, and any rework or comments, etc., will all be shared through SIT working group, will it? That's
right. Yeah, I think in worst case, if there's any dispute over these 3 test cases, we'll just keep them in scope. None of them have been, according to our current analysis, which is still ongoing, none of them have been run. So we're not kind of having anybody run a test case that they didn't need to, at least at this point. And we want to make sure that they stay out of your backlogs while there's some discussion over it. But that's where we are. Hi, Anna.
Just to say, as usual, the issue that we always have is that the test case name doesn't actually say what the test case is about. It's just the type. So we have to look these up to understand what the actual issues, what the actual test scenario would be.
Yep.
To understand whether or not that's valid. And it's just it would be useful if the test case name always had what type of test, whether it's a what it actually is, rather than just traditional, which means nothing.
Yep. I hear that confusion and share it to a certain extent. It would take resources to change it, to be honest.
Oh yes, absolutely. It would have been but yeah, just for this slide would have been quite useful, just so we don't all have to go away and find out what they all are. That's all.
Fair. I expect that this would. I expected to have you again uploading it to the collaboration base. I expected your review to kind of be offline.
Thank you.
Sure. Hi, Maheswaran. Did I get that right?
Yes, correct, Roger. Roger, sorry if I misunderstood wrongly. After seeing this meeting invite, right, what I thought, the list of test cases, I mean, from the overall SIT list of test cases, right, nearly a quite chunk of functional migration, if I say in numbers, right, nearly 45 test cases from functional and 42 from migration has been marked as not applicable for cohort C. So I thought that we will be discussing on the reason for each and every test cases which has been marked as not applicable. But I could see only in the previous slide 3 test cases has been listed and we were talking about it. So can I try to understand what is the plan for the those 45 test cases which is marked as not applicable, and when we will be getting the reason for each and every test cases why it is marked for not applicable?
May I ask for your patience, because I think that we'll cover a lot of that in the next few slides. This was the original purpose of this meeting, was to walk through just these, but again, we thought that there would be a larger list and a lot more discussion. But I think you're signposting some of the items coming up. If I don't answer your questions by the end of the session, please will you raise your hand again and let me know?
Sure, thank you.
All right, great. Any other discussion on this particular aspect of our initiatives? Hi, Shazia.
Thanks, Roger. So what you're saying is there were 60 originally, you now reduced it to 3.
That's right.
So what does this translate into? Sorry, that might be a stupid question, but what does this actually mean in terms of timelines, effort, etc.? Do you think? Do you have a view?
I think it's several hundred points at most. In fact, they're all functional tests, so none of them are migration. I don't have the exact point value for these 3 tests, I have to say, but I can take an action to let you know, to publish that along with us. Yeah, I don't expect it to be a large number. And I think Keith had made this point in some FTIGs that, if we did have a large number of tests that were duplicates or were, somehow, covering the same requirements and the same ground, then we would have gotten the scoping exercise. Initially, we would have gotten the scoping exercise wrong. So this is kind of just kind of due diligence, making sure that we are testing the right things and we are not wasting people's time.
So the position on these, sorry, just to clarify my thinking, is so the position on these would become optional. Is that what you propose in here?
I think either option, yeah, optional at best. We might just propose that they be descoped from SIT functional scope completely. But I think that's up to working group to recommend.
Yeah.
I'll bring these to working group and then to the advisory group.
Yeah, I guess it's just about looking at teams looking at the detail and reviewing them. So yeah, that's great.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to be. I know that we've been hurrying up and trying to do a lot of work in the last few months, especially with CR55, and I hear again. I hear the slight, or at times maybe more than slight, frustration that it hasn't been entirely transparent. So that's what I'm trying to open the lid on and let you behind the scenes. You can see some of the comments over here by the team.
Yeah, they're not fully understandable. Some of them, you know,
yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Until you get into it.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I expect this to be. This is a walkthrough. This isn't the final. The final time we might talk about it, and we will get. And I expect you guys to take these tests and to review them offline. And come back with questions to working group. All right. Any further comments or questions on this slide? All right, so that's the detail, and that's what this session was originally meant to cover. Again, like I said, with code bodies, and we'll take it to working group and advisor group. But taking a step back, what are some of the other things that we've undertaken? Again, they each arose organically, and they were relatively independent of each other. But the net effect needs to be looked at with one lens, I think, and make sure that we're in good shape. So this is the migration optimization. We're kind of working backwards from the most recent to the most furthest away. Keith talked about this a lot in FTIG. I don't know how many of you are in FTIG, but are on the attendee list for FTIG. But this was around where are the best places to run these tests that are in scope, and why? What can we do? What's the best thing we can do? So that I've repurposed a slide. In fact, I now see that I didn't change the document classification, but that's public now. So looking at these, we've got three broad categories. Some in the middle here, you can see, and over here are best handled in PIT. We talked about how a lot of them are negative tests, and it's incredibly difficult to do a negative test in SIT, where there are quite rightly lots of data protection and sanitation measures in place to make sure that no negative data or no negative test cases occur. So it's best handled in PIT, again, by one participant who has agreed to take them on board and work them through, and that they were relatively short when they're handled in PIT, whereas it might take up to 5 different market roles to run these tests in a SIT and end-to-end kind of working environment. So we thought, again, in terms of optimization and efficiency, could we ask this one participant, St. Clements? So again, thank you to anyone who's on the line from St. Clements for taking them into your scope for PIT. We thought that it would be a much more efficient way of taking people's time. Having said that, SIT operational coverage, you can see where we've added tests to the SIT operational scope. Again, from an efficiency standpoint, anecdotally, we've taken them into, well, not anecdotally, we've definitely taken them into scope for this SIT operational test phase. Anecdotally, initial analysis looks like an average of 120 steps down to possibly 12 when you take them from end-to-end and functional point of view down into an operational point of view. Again, significant efficiency increase. And we don't feel that this is going to change timelines on SIT operational testing at all. It is additional scope. We are looking at it again, as I said, initial analysis, but at this stage, we think it's going to be really fairly minor in terms of if you look at them from an operational standpoint. Let me just go through the last section, and I'll come to you, Ellie. I see you. And then other were where we saw meter segments, where we saw that advanced meters or traditional meters were not required if we ran the smart meter role, or changing them, different permutations, and that we were able to kind of run through those. All right, Ellie. Yes, hello.
Hello. So those 13 migration scripts, will they be added to the operational test cases in collaboration base with notification that those have been removed from migration and added to operational, and therefore will be the approved and baselined set of tests?
That is correct. That is the plan.
And the communication of that will come again via SIT working group, SITAG, and then uplift communications. I
think initially through the normal uplift communications that Kevin's team have been doing for minor changes to test cases, but we will definitely be going through the governance process. I think
this is minor though, because like there's 13.
This is not minor. Yeah, no, this is 13.
I was going to say, based on the operational test scope, it feels quite a few. So
it does.
Again, what's considered major change to test case scope versus incremental updates?
Yeah. In SITAG tomorrow, we are only taking what went through industry review and what we discussed at SIT working group last week. So these will not be part of that. But I think you were on it. I know you were, where we talked about there were specific test cases that we did not recommend in the working group. And so these will be bundled along with those when those are ready. There was the onboarding and offboarding for the DIP. These test cases will be bundled along with those, and we'll take them through SIT working group and SITAG. I don't believe these are scheduled to be run until the spring. So we've got a few months before they're scheduled to be run.
Okay, so a definitive operational scope of tests. Cool. Thanks, Roger.
No problem. Anoop.
Quick one, Roger. On the tests which are moved to PIT, wouldn't the participant who is volunteering would have already run this PIT scenarios as part of their original PIT, or at least some variants of that in the original PIT? Or are we saying that these are brand new scenarios which they wouldn't have considered in PIT?
Correct. These are brand new scenarios that were not originally part of their PIT scope, but quite kindly they've agreed to take them into scope. We've extended their PIT timelines, and we're working together with them. As well, I should note that these particular ones, anytime we've taken them from a SIT test phase and pushed them into PIT, we're holding them to the same evidence standard that we would expect in SIT. I know Anna's raised her hand. So we will be going over the evidence, the test evidence that, especially for these test cases, to make sure that we can evidence that for code bodies, for qualification, and for governance. I might, Chris, I might skip you because Anna has her head up.
Go for it.
Hi, yeah, just to say,
I'll come back to you.
Yeah, sorry, just to say that yes, St Clements has done a lot of these tests in PIT, but we are doing them. We're doing them again. So, for example, we've done risk-based testing rather than every single scenario of every single type. So we're now doing it to the scope of the program. So a lot of this has already been tested, but we are doing it for the program specifically to make and taking the evidence as expected. So we are retesting some of these, and some we won't have tested because, as I say, we've done risk-based. So we've done, for example, advanced or we've done smart but not advanced and things like that. So So, but they are all covered, and yeah, we're not considering that we should find anything new and exciting out. But also the thing is that we are doing these only at St Clement's, and we obviously can't do it end to end. We can send it off to the simulator, but we can't do these end to end. So we can only prove that MPRS lapses or whatever. The MPRS does what it's supposed to do. We cannot account for anything else that would be done by any other parties.
And in review with code bodies, they accepted that as good for qualification. So again, we need to take this through the governance process, but code bodies have reviewed this list and have agreed with our approach. So thank you, Anna. I hadn't caught up with you recently to talk about these particular tests, so thanks for the update.
You're welcome.
Chris.
Yeah, just a quick one to make sure I understand other. So is that effectively rationalisation? So you're removing tests because there are duplicates in there, yeah?
That's exactly right. That they were written simply because they were permutations, and I think if we had extra time, we would want to cover them. But the value that we would gain out of running an advanced versus a trad, and the purpose of the test itself wouldn't be affected. We don't believe, and we've been able to take them to code bodies, and they've reviewed it, and they're okay with that from a qualification perspective. And that's all that the code bodies have done, is look at it from a qualification perspective.
That's great, thanks.
Okay. Any further questions on this one? Hi, Lee.
Hi, Roger. So I guess a similar question to, we're interested in the points associated with the 3 functional tests.
Yes.
I'm very interested in the points associated with these 39 tests. So is it the next slide? Is that what you're going to tell me?
I am not.
I
will say that these are.
Roger.
I know. I'm sorry. These are already in the model, and already Keith drove a lot of this, as well as Ankur and myself. But the reason that we drove it and we're quite insistent that we get to an agreement was that this was part of the model, that we'd made these assumptions as part of, I think they were part of CR55. So we wanted to make sure that these assumptions were borne out, and that we had a working model, so that they are already in the model.
So when you say they're in the model, they are part of the points that are calculated up to a total of 18,110 points.
Yes.
18,110 points for SIT functional SIT migration.
Yep.
What you haven't told us is what are the points. Well, apart from Keith saying 25% of that 18,110 is now attributed to SIT migration, I don't think 25% of 18,110 equals the 4,340 points that have been reduced by these 39 tests.
I can produce that traceability for you.
Okay, that's my own calculation, by the way.
Fair enough. Migration tests have been the longer tests, and they are usually in the 100 and some odd step range, or more than that. So this was a significant portion of that D-scope, or of that points value change.
Okay, so I think. Can you confirm that 25% of 18,110 equals the SIT migration scope now?
No, because I was going to say, I think that we've also looked at the paired cohort tests, and that there were some assumptions in the original models that we've looked at and again worked through, and have a more realistic point. I think there were a number of changes, and I'll have to get with Keith, but we can break down each of the model changes to make sure that you've got it.
I think all we need is 2 numbers. SIT functional equals that total, and then participants can take away unmetered stuff from cohorts, and SIT migration equals that minus any unmetered, etc., etc. That's what's missing. So if add them together is 18,110, what's the two numbers for sit functional, sit migration?
What's the breakdown between the two? Yep,
Yeah,
I'll take an action for that.
Thank you.
No problem. Any last comments on sit migration? Optimization, I should say. And yes, Ellen, that I don't know if that's you, Ellie Crawford, or not, but yes, this slide pack will be shared after. As I said, I'll put it on the collaboration base after this call. All right, moving on. So in the summer, we identified that there was a number of gaps in the original requirements to test traceability matrix, especially around roles and the ways that our tests assumed certain roles would be fulfilled, and that there were we identified that there were changes in the way functionality was expected to work depending on the roles involved. So there was a large effort that we undertook, again working quite closely with code bodies, and we looked at this was in June of this year. The design team undertook an exercise to derive unique requirement reference numbers because there were requirements that were spread across multiple different documents that hadn't been brought together. So once we had the unique requirement reference numbers, then we were able to map the tests that we had in place, and we then looked at where the gaps were. So this was, like I said, a significant effort by the test architecture team to look at our role-based requirements for sit functional. After that activity was completed, the code bodies and the architecture team went through a number of iterative loops, quite close review, especially for sit functional of the changes that were proposed. And this included both taking some tests out of scope, but primarily was adding tests to scope. And this was all done around the same time that CR55 was being proposed. So we worked quite hard and at including those into the model. And then after a number of months, we finally were able to get to agreement with the code bodies on the 12th of November around verbal agreement in principle. Now, the RTTM itself is a living document. There are still changes. Anytime a test case is changed because of a defect, we check it against the RTTM. Anytime there are further reviews that sometimes the code bodies come with, go through, and they ask for updates to be made with qualification testing in mind, with other lenses. So we have the agreement in principle, and we're still updating both sides, both the requirement side and the test side. So SIP migration, same idea. Early September is when we started looking at SIP migration. Once we filled the role-based test gaps and we knew what we were adding to scope, the migration team began working with code bodies to come to agreement. And we have agreed in principle with the code bodies around the SIP migration RTTM. Again, literally, I think as of last week, there were still some updates and tweaks that we were making that Ankur has been working through diligently. So personally, I welcome the scrutiny. I want that level of scrutiny, and I want to be making sure that we are running the right tests and that we don't have, that we completely achieve qualification for any SIT participant that goes through SIT with us. This is all I was going to say about the RTTM updates. Are there any questions about the RTTM? I know that we signposted it in FTIG quite a few times. Hi, Chris.
Yeah, just an idea of scale, Roger.
I did ask for that before this call. Significant scale for both functional and migration. Probably a good 20-30% added, I think, on both, and that's again very high level, hand in the air. We do have this in train. And as you'll see at the end of the call, there should be a way to determine that relatively easily once activities are completed. But as a preview, I'm asking the architecture team to pull together a kind of a traceability document where we trace from approval at the advisory group level for each theme for functional migration, NFT, operational, everything. And then we list any changes to scope and why and what the approval process was. So once we have that, I mean, it should be fairly easy to derive, okay, these changes were because of the RTTM work, and this was the amount of scope added and subtracted.
And that's been included in the model?
It's all been included in the model. Yes, the model it undergoes quite a bit of scrutiny. Yes, yeah, especially with the RTTM, those updates were happening at the same time we were proposing CR55, and so we incorporated them fairly quickly and fairly easily. Right. Any other questions about RTTM updates? Hi, Lee.
So I think what's forming in my head, Roger, which I think will be benefit is just almost like a simple spreadsheet of, we use currencies of number of tests and test points associated to tests. So just an up and down that this activity added this number of tests, this number of test points. This activity reduced tests and test points to come up with the two totals. So we can see clearly that rationalization equaled that, optimization equaled that, RTTM code body reviews equaled that.
Yes. Yeah, once we have that list, it's going to be fairly easy to map the points to it easily. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I think we can include that as part of the scope of the document that we'll be producing. All right. Anything else on RTTM? Moving on. Settlement rationalization. So again, at FTIG, we walked everyone through this. This is a fairly busy slide. I think the key takeaways from this is we divided the settlement tests that were originally in scope for every cohort, that we divided them into 3 sets. And the first set, settling normally, was one that everyone had to run. And that is what it says on the tin. Settling normally, we go through every day. We trace back all of the activities and make sure that accuracy is maintained, and that it's quite important that everyone does this. But the actual exit criteria were a minimum of 2 cohorts, any 2, and it didn't have to be MVC candidates. Then in the second set, settlement accuracy. Again, there are 29 of them that need to be run in SIT B and 8 in SIT A. But again, the exit criteria said 2 cohorts as a minimum. Any 2 didn't have to be MVC. And then the SIT A tests needed to be at least 2 MVC candidates. And finally, for the supporting market role qualification, set number 3, again, those of you on FTIG will hear Stuart talking through this every single time. For those 22 tests, a minimum of 2 MVC candidates needed to run them. And then for the SIT A tests that are coming up, all 8 cohorts are required to execute each test case. So looking at these exit criteria and taking a step back, we looked at what's the best way to make sure that we can get through this testing and meet our exit criteria easily. So instead of having everyone run all the tests, we're looking at these minimum measures, especially around the cohorts. So that is what Stuart and the team have done. Here you can see the actual test cases themselves. Those of you, I didn't include the slide in this deck, but Stuart's got a useful slide in the FTIG pack that shows the status of each exit criterion and where each one is. And we've achieved several of them, not all of them. And settlement testing is going to be a subject at tomorrow's SITAG. and there's quite a lot of discussion going on around it. But from a scope point of view, these are why not every cohort is running every test, and what and how we've broken them down, and why once we achieve 2 cohorts running certain types of tests, then we just move on. Is that clear to everyone, how we've derived them and how we're spreading them out? Great. All right. I think this is all I had on settlement. So just wanted to review, especially for those of you who've been through FTIG, that's how we're breaking those out. Hi, Anoop. Yes.
Just a quick question, Roger. So regarding the optional scenarios within settlements, though I mean they're optional, it doesn't stop any cohort from going ahead and execute them. Am I right?
That's correct. Yes. If you've got the time and we've got the environment available for it, then yes, by all means, please do go ahead. The only, to my understanding, the only test cases that are required for qualification were the settling normally test cases.
Which is set 1.
Yes, set 1. Yep, that's right. That everyone ran. Right. Okay, moving on. So there's a lot of work that's been done around scope and around what we're asking everyone to run. So what I'm now working with the test architecture team, and again, out of feedback, and thank you for engaging from participants at the SIT working group, is we've got all of these independent initiatives, and they've all been, again, kind of properly done. I think throughout each process is we've made sure that we had proper scrutiny and proper that it can be. I think we've had quite a bit of review, and so we've done all these things independently. Let's bring them into one document so that we have all of the traceability in one place, and it's easy to understand. Because again, from the questions, even on this call, there's still quite a lot of clarification that everyone wants as to what the scope is and why we're asking you to run which tests and why we're not asking you to run certain tests. So just want to reiterate, all these are independent. We've had code bodies review each one, and they've fed back suggestions to us, but their perspective is necessarily only on qualification. So as I said, we've had the request from participants. We want to make sure that we create this one document that tracks all scope changes. When it's ready, I will bring this document. I don't have a timeline on it because there is a certain amount of going back into the past and gathering that data. But I'll definitely bring it to the working groups, both SIT and NFT, and to SITAG. NFT where appropriate. It might not be necessarily totally appropriate because we're still doing traceability for NFT at the moment. All right. So I don't have a timeline on it. I expect it to be relatively early in the new year. It is a looking backwards exercise rather than a looking forwards, but I think we can. I think it's a useful piece of work, and will help you all. Any questions or clarifications on that? All right, that is the end of the presentation. So 46 minutes. Thank you all for your engagement. Any last questions, Anoop?
Just one clarification on settlements again. Sorry, I might have got it wrong. So I was just looking at the slide, and you mentioned that the settling normally is the one which is required to be done for qualification. Am I right? If you look at set 3, also you have mentioned, though you have mentioned minimum 2 MVCs.
The support.
It says all 8 cohorts have requires to run all the tests. Am I right? To qualify, which means
I think
that is.
You're right. You're right. No, you're absolutely right. I think I misspoke around settling normally. It's the one that we've been able to run so far that is required for qualification. We have not been able to run the subset of set 3 because sit A has been taken up by functional migration. You're absolutely right.
So basically, it's 22 plus 3. 25 scenarios is what we have to all run to ensure we qualify. Am I right?
I think that there's a subset of these 22 that are only able to be run in sit A. It's not all.
Agreed. I mean, whenever we move, there is a particular timeline given for sit A. Am I right? After the non-functional and operational. So once we ensure that 22 plus 3, 25 scenarios are run, then we are good to qualify from a settlement standpoint.
From a settlement standpoint, yes.
Yeah. Thanks. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Sure thing. Hi, Maswaran.
Yes, hi, Roger.
I did ask you to raise your hand at the end if you didn't address.
That's right. So migration, the one numbers I mentioned, right, 41 being marked as not applicable. Yes, I could see 39 covered in your deck in a sheet, and only 2 is not covered, which I will go back, check and get back to the program. But on the functional one, where 45 test cases, particularly for cohort C, where I'm coming from, is marked as not applicable, which is not covered in this sheet.
Okay, I think that in that case, I think I need to work with the coordinators to understand which ones have been marked as not applicable, because I think there are a number of reasons why they might be marked that way, including this kind of scope review, including for some settlement tests potentially. They've been already run in other cohorts. There's probably a number of reasons. So for functional, I think I would want to dig with the test coordinators and find out what the coordination team as to why particular tests were marked as NA.
Yeah, and can I get the reasons for each test cases and shared with us?
I'm sure you can. So I think let's work with which cohort are you in? Who's your test coordinator?
Cohort C, Arun.
Aaron. Okay, so we'll work with Aaron and make sure that that we can share with you why these tests were marked as NA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Hi, Lee.
Hi, I just want to check something you just said, Roger. Again, it's settlement set 3. So my understanding is set 3 can completely be running sit B, with sit A being used as a fallback contingency capability. Yep. If SITAG approve it, if by the 21st of February participants don't conclude their set 3 tests in sit B. But the only settlement tests that is dependent on sit A are the cost settlement tests, which you've got the 4 weeks planned in the summer to do. None of which are qualification.
That's correct.
Obligations.
Sorry. Yes, okay. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Stuart is a better person to ask these things because he's deep in there. But you're right. It is just change of supplier tests. All right. Any other questions from you, Lee?
No, thank you.
All right, great. Anna.
Hi, just regarding this sit functional 45 test. I know, for example, some the sit functional ones rather than the migration ones, but I know that some, for example, the way that things work, some of the cohorts can't do certain tests. But will this list be shared with everyone? You've said to work with one of the coordinators. Will this list be shared as part of this slide pack so that we can all understand what those 45 tests are, to see if because I know that we have looked through some tests and some were due to be rationalized, but we couldn't see, we thought that perhaps they shouldn't. So is this list, we could do with seeing the list just to make sure that there isn't a misunderstanding somewhere.
Sure. Yeah, I think the NA tag, and again, I don't want to reduce any of the flexibility that the coordination team has. I think that there are various reasons why a test might be marked NA. Might be under consideration for rationalization. There might be a number of different reasons. I think that at a high level, I certainly will want to include which tests have been descoped in this traceability document. I think if there are additional questions, then after the traceability document is produced, that's the time that would be best to get with your test coordinator and review why any tests were NA. If you have any questions, I think that's probably the best, because they are used in a very dynamic way and can be marked that way for a particular sprint or for the rest of the program. You know, I think there is there's a blocked status as well that we use for defects, but you know, maybe there are temporary environment conditions, or maybe there's a data issue, or maybe there might be a number of reasons why a test might be marked NA. We know that we might know that it would fail, so then we won't ask you to run it. Jenny's on and can probably
I was just
talk a bit better
going to
about it than I
say.
can.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I understand there's some dispensation. Oh, they're defects, dispensation defects. Sorry, that's a different matter.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
Yeah, so in essence, we mark test cases as NA, and you're right, Roger. One, if there's been some sort of evaluation by the test assurance team, and they've been marked as descoped, so then we mark them as NA. And then the second one is if a cohort has been granted dispensation because they cannot run that test for whatever reason. It's normally where there's negative validation and their systems won't allow it. But in that case, some cohorts can run them and some cohorts can't run them. But there's always defects raised for that. We don't just willy-nilly use the NA label. It is for a very, very specific reason. Either there's a defect attached to it, or we've been advised by the test assurance team.
Yep.
Thanks for that. Yes, and I assume that the dispensation defects, as you say, some of them possibly could never be run by anyone. So then that's where they feed into this 3 that are rationalised. And some, I guess, as you say, can only be run by certain. So someone somewhere along the line would test them. So that's fine. Thank you.
That's the idea. Any other comments or questions? I hope this has been useful for everyone. I think you know, it's definitely a discussion that needs to be had, and you know, bringing them all together. I think we haven't done that as a program until this point. So I'm happy to start this. All right, thank you very much for your time, everyone. Have a great holiday. If I don't talk to you before then, I think there's no FTIG as a meeting this week.
Thanks, Roger.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Cheers.
Thank you.